This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, dear members, industry colleagues, and respected speakers. A hearty welcome to all of you to today's web seminar on the Budget 21 India, organized by the German Engineering Federation, VDMA, with Roadland Partner Consulting Private Limited. We hope all of you and your family and colleagues are safe and doing well. I'm Jamli John, based out of the Mumbai office of VDMA, and I'll be taking you through the session. Before we continue, I'd like to remind all of you that for optimal viewing experience, kindly select the view active camera mode, which is just above. Kindly turn off or mute your microphones, please. And please post your questions in the chat box to us. So you can continue to post your questions during the entire session, and we'll take it up in the last leg of the web seminar. Next slide. VDMA is committed to India. VDMA, the Mechanical Engineering Industry Association, was founded in November 1892 and is the most important voice of the mechanical engineering industry. VDMA represents around 3,300 mostly medium-sized companies, making it the largest industry association in Europe. The members currently contributing to 78% as exports, which is equivalent to 232 billion euro production. Recognizing the very early significance of India as a future market for the member companies, India was the first overseas office amongst the big countries. VDMA stands to be the only industrial association having well-established offices in India since several years, with our offices located in Noida, Kolkata, Mumbai, and Bangalore. Next slide. For today's web seminar, we shall begin with a short address from Mr. Rajesh Nath, Managing Director of VDMA India. We have amongst us Mr. Manfred Auster, the Consul General of Federal Republic of Germany from Kolkata, as our esteemed chief guest. Thank you, Mr. Auster, for joining us. He shall make the special address on revival of economy, Indo-German cooperation. This will be followed by the presentations from Roadland Partner on the latest changes in legal and tax framework, covering direct tax and international taxation, GST and customs, and transfer pricing. This will be followed by the Q&A session. With no further delay, I'd like to hand it over to you, Mr. Nath.
Yeah, thank you, Jamli. Good afternoon, members and friends from the industry. A hearty welcome to all of you at the Budget 2021 analysis session today, being organized by the German Engineering Federation, VDMA, along with Roadland Partner Consulting Private Limited. I extend a warm welcome to Mr. Manfred Auster, Consul General, German Consulate in Kolkata, Mr. Martin Gorlein, Partner and Head of India Roadland Partner, our esteemed speakers today, Mr. Gaurav Makhija, Mr. Anand Khetan, and Mr. Sunil Vaidya. Friends, I would like to start with a quote from the Managing Director of International Monetary Fund. She said, "Countries are encouraged to spend as much as possible, but keep the receipts and keep in mind that growth needs to follow." The first budget of this new decade, friends, is, as they say in Latin, sui generis. That means unique, since it has been undertaken in circumstances like never before. Amidst a global economy already in pangs of a slowdown and being pushed into an unprecedented contraction, a fillip to the Indian economy through a growth-oriented and expansionary endeavor instead of a protectionist budget was the necessity of the hour. The two key features of this budget have been emphasis on infrastructure and the healthcare sector. This digital budget laid down the government's vision for Atmanirbhar Bharat, resting on the 6 pillars. As expected, a pandemic recovery plan dominated a 37% increase in infrastructure spending, with an outlay of 5.45 lakh crores and a more than doubled expenditure on health and healthcare infrastructure, were the most prominent features of the Union Budget 2021. The Finance Minister did the unthinkable by front-loading spending to 34.5 lakh crores, a steep increase of 28.4% over last year's levels. While spending has seen a significant lift, the centre's revenue collections are estimated to fall by 7.7% to 15.6 lakh crores. Highlights for the industry included the aim to end the monopolies of distribution companies and provide the consumers alternatives to choose from amongst more than one distribution company. A hydrogen energy mission in 2021-22 will also be launched for generating hydrogen from green power sources. To give a further boost to the non-conventional energy sector, additional capital infusion of 1,000 crore has been provided to Solar Energy Corporation of India and 1,500 crores to Indian Renewable Energy Development Agency. The voluntary scrapping policy announced in the budget will, for the first time, bring fitness tests as the criteria for scrapping old vehicles. Over 1 crore light, medium and heavy commercial vehicles with an age of more than 15 years have been plying on Indian roads. The policy will enable shifting of older to newer vehicles, which will be safer and cleaner and reduce road accidents. The Government of India has finally set the tone for recovery of auto sector, which has been significantly impacted by the pandemic. This will not only help boost the demand for production of commercial vehicles, but also support the entire transportation ecosystem. Also, while it would have been good to see some more initiatives to promote electric vehicles in this budget, we are glad that the government has noted India's critical role in the global automotive supply chain post-COVID-19. Specific initiatives through production-linked schemes, creation of infrastructure for R&D, and enabling skill development in new gen technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning will help drive investment in engineering and research. More than the numbers, the essence of the budget lies in the intent. The government has been carrying out structural reforms to kickstart the investment cycle. First, it reduced corporate taxes. Second, it introduced production-linked incentives for 13 sectors. Third, it introduced the labor codes to replace a number of labor laws. Now the government is looking at monetizing assets and even privatizing public sector banks and an insurance company to fund growth. For the cricket lovers' friends, as economic advisor mentioned, the budget is a combination of Pujara and Pant's innings, consistency and flamboyance together. India won in Australia. Now India needs to rise fast from the slowdown in new world order, and the budget sets a roadmap for that. Our experts today from Rodal & Partner would highlight the finer details of the budget and its impact. However, before that, friends, I would now like to invite Mr. Manfred Oster from the German consulate in Kolkata for a special address. Let me briefly introduce Mr. Oster. Mr. Oster has been serving as a diplomat since 1991. He studied law at Freie University in Berlin. He started his distinguished career as a foreign diplomat by serving at the German consulate in Kiev, Ukraine. A prestigious posting of Mr. Oster was to the NATO in Brussels. Before joining the German consulate in Kolkata as Consul General, Mr. Oster served as the German ambassador to Haiti. A pleasure to have you with us today, Mr. Oster, and we look forward to your address. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Nad. Thank you to VDMA and all the colleagues for inviting me yet again to this kind of web-based encounters. Unfortunately, we're still in a situation where that seems to be the norm, but I would say that here in India, the situation looks much brighter at this stage than back in Europe. which is good, and which allows obviously also for interactions that at least we can have on bilateral basis. And it gives us hope that we might, with the rollout of also of the vaccination, reach a point where India can function more or less as before. So we see different states and different measures here that take place. Here in West Bengal, we are going to start some of the schools again. We have even pools being open. Not that this is something really important for the industry, but it is something that shows that a little bit of normality is coming back into our life. Unfortunately, as far as I understand it, that is not yet the case in Germany or in Europe for that matter. There we still have to have the effects of the coronavirus being battled with measures that coming from with lockdowns, with quite a lot of restrictions that obviously also affect the economy, business, and industry. So when you ask me to speak about revival of the economy in Indo-German cooperation, that certainly is something that I understand to mean the revival post-COVID. And there we have at this stage probably slightly different points to start from. You have alluded to that, Mr. Nath, in summarizing also parts of the budget, that the investments are being planned here and foreseen in the budget. We see that an unprecedented situation that we have in both our countries and also both our regions, and actually around the world, are calling for unprecedented measures as well. We see the necessity, and we allow our governments, even in a market economy now, to take measures that under normal circumstances are less likely to be taken. They are aiming in Europe and in Germany in particular at stabilizing businesses, enterprises, and individuals who are affected by the virus, by the effects of that pandemic, affected also quite often in cases where they really can't be blamed for that, that they are slithering into an economic situation or a financial situation that is beyond their control. We have seen quite a lot of healthy businesses in the service sector in particular who are without their fault now at the verge of bankruptcy, or at least of suffering very heavily. And the same is true clearly for employees and individuals who are either losing their job or are not in a situation where they can act in a way that allows them for their daily livelihoods. The degrees to this are different in our two countries. You remember clearly the lockdowns here in India at the beginning of the pandemic, with the huge amount of people who left the big metropolises like Mumbai to go back to their villages. Probably also one of the reason why and how the virus could at that phase spread quite uncontrolled. But we also have the same situation, well, not the same, but a comparable situation with people in Germany who are as I said, in danger of losing their jobs. And that is where the unprecedented measures come into place. In Germany, we have something that is established already for quite some time. So it's not yet the very special measures that I'm speaking about, but it is what we call Kurzarbeitergeld, which allows companies to retain their employees even in a crisis situation by government subsidies that go into the loans or take up part of the salaries of their employees. Hence, making it, especially in the specialized industries, possible for those people to keep working for the companies, or at least to be retained on the payroll, which in the situation of the revival of the economy is something very important, so that you can jumpstart from that point of view. You can jumpstart production, you can go back, you don't have to look for skilled workers yet again. but you have your colleagues with you, you have your employees with you, and I think that is something that in particular the larger companies in the industry, part of which you are representing in VDMA, it just told me that I was not audible for a bit. Is that true? It gave me a message.
We can hear you, Mr. Yeah.
And there was not too much of a break, Mr. Nath.
No, just maybe 4-5 seconds. You can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So Kurzarbeitergeld, just saying this is one of the things that we have had good experiences, not only now, but also during the last economic crisis. And it's something that is not only valuable and useful for the industry, for the business and enterprises, but at the same time also for the employees. So it has a clear social element to it, which allows people to continue with their daily lives in that form. But there are, of course, there are limitations to that. So in parts of the service industry where you don't have necessarily the capacity of skilled workers, thinking here of the tourism industry and then restaurants, bars, that gets more and more complicated, especially when it's small business with few employees or just family businesses. And for them, new measures had to be found. And there we are coming to what I see as something relatively new and something that the governments had, again, a responsibility to take up and to look after in the daily life of the economy. So we have seen different forms of that across the globe, reaching from just direct subsidies in the case of the US to possibilities to extend some of the substitution for money and loans in other countries, for unemployment aid in a form that is on a higher level than it used to be in normal times. But we also see huge programs that have been laid up, and one of those is clearly the special program of the European Union to the core of 750 billion euros in the next 7-year framework, which is in addition to the roughly 1.0 trillion ordinary budget of the Union. So we have seen a situation where governments are willing to come up with new ideas to overcome even some taboos that have been there, especially as far as the budget of the Union is concerned. But that comes with some conditionality, and that is probably also something I would argue is the right way to use. When we speak about the revival of the economy, then it should be a modernized revival or even a reformed kind of revival. It is a pause that we have seen in this year 2020 that allowed us to take a deep breath and to reflect upon the necessities of sustainability and a greening of the economy. And so it is only fair, I guess, that most of these government programs that we see in Europe are linked to progress in that regard, to make industry and make production and make the economy as a whole more sustainable and greener. Here again, the European Commission has come forward with a new Green Deal that foresees expenditure in quite a lot of areas and across the board that should go and are linked to measures being taken in that regard, so that we can meet the conditions and also our obligations under international treaties, in particular also the Paris Accord. Now, I think that is something that I also witness here in India, and Mr. Nath, you have alluded to the fact that in the budget, renewable energies and investments in those, scrapping of old cars, going stronger for e-vehicles are measures that are foreseen. I think that is something very laudable, and is something that should be pursued to the benefit, again, of most of us, that is to say, consumers, just people, humankind, even other animals and living beings, but at the same time, clearly to all industries that are innovative, that can draw the lessons from the past and keep developing new ideas, to develop new measures, new tools, and to improve what is existing, with having in mind the possibility for such an improvement in our daily lives, in the environment. And I'm pretty sure that the members of VDMA, but also other German companies who are organized within the German Chamber, Indo-German Chamber of Commerce in India, fall into that category and are doing the utmost to not only adhere to these programs, but also to spread the messages of the successful revival of the economy in that sense. And with that, I'm looking forward to your in-depth analysis of what we are going to do during this seminar, this hour or two, because I really have to rely on your perspective in this regard, and definitely your expertise. So I'm looking forward to our exchanges here. Thank you very much, Mr. Nath. Thank you very much, gentlemen, ladies. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Oster, for the your address and highlighting also the initiatives being taken in Europe. And I'm sure our colleagues, friends from Rodeln Partner will, during the subsequent presentations, go and into the depth of the budget and analyze the budget. I now hand it over to my colleague, Mrs. Jimli John, who will take it forward.
Thank you, Mr. Oster, and thank you, Mr. Nath, for the kind address. We would now like to invite our speakers from Rodeln Partner to share their expertise and highlight the key takeaways from the budget. We have amongst us Mr. Gaurav Makhijani, the Senior Associate Director for International Tax, Mr. Anand Ketan, Partner and Head of Indirect Tax, Mr. Sunil Vaidya, the Partner at Sastakar Vaidya & Company, and Mr. Martin Worlin, the Partner and Head of Indian Practice for Rodeln Partner. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, and thank you for your patience. Over to you, Gaurav.
Thank you, Jamli, and good morning to everyone who's joining us from Germany, and good afternoon to all the Indian colleagues joining us today. We can go to the next slide, please. Next. Yeah. So as Mr. Nath already mentioned about the V-shaped recovery which the Indian economy has seen. Now, if we see the IMF report as well, IMF has provided that the Indian growth would be somewhere around 11.5%. That's the real GDP number which IMF is talking about. Also, if we see the tax collection vis-a-vis the budgeted numbers, even though there is a decline for the past 2 quarters, if we see the numbers of tax collection of October and November, there has been a steep rise, especially in the GST collection. So if we talk about the overall tax collection, it's somewhere around 17% higher in October as compared to the last year figure. Similarly, in November, it was approximately 23% higher as compared to the similar period for last year. This is a month-by-month comparison chart. Also, if we see the GST collection data, there is a steep rise, and in fact, in November, the data was 1.15 trillion INR, and in January it was 1.20 trillion INR, which is highest till date GST collection. So this shows that the consumption in the Indian economy, which was worrying the Indian government, has back to path and recovery and growth going forward. Now, the slide which you see provides the COVID situation in India. If we see that the January was the first month wherein India found its first COVID case, and then in March India went to lockdown. Reacting to that, government came out with a self-reliant India, which is Atmanirbhar Bharat package, and therein many initiatives were taken to boost the economy and lead the growth to the recovery. And the major initiative package to the MSME industry, agriculture and allied industry, focus was also made on energy sector and migrant workers. Then after June, the lockdown was shifted in a staggered manner, and in September, India witnessed the highest number of COVID-19 cases. And post-September, as I already mentioned, that India has been on the path to the recovery, and we already see the V-shaped recovery, and the number of the percentage of unemployment data, if you see, that's also have been is back to the normal, which was prior to the COVID situation. You can move to the next slide. In this slide, you will see the different kinds of structural reforms, especially in the capital market, which Indian government has introduced for the economic growth of the country. Highlight being that the insurance sector FDI limit has been increased to 74%. Then a lot of restructuring reform is being introduced in the capital market and GIFT City. There are a lot of tax reforms which have been introduced for the GIFT City to make it successful. Next slide, please. As Mr. Nath already briefly talked about the Indian government approach on the investment in different sector, there was one sector which had a special focus in the minds of government, which was health, infrastructure and pollution control, and a lot of money has been allocated for this particular purpose. And in fact, India has recently started the world's largest vaccination drive. So now we'll come to the direct tax proposal, and we'll try to decode and understand what impacts does this have on your business. So we can go to the next slide. Yeah. So the first major highlight of the budget from direct tax perspective was that there was no change in the corporate tax rates for financial year 21-22. Also, there was no change introduced for any other person, being individual, HUF, partnership, etc. There was an anticipation that government may come out with COVID cess, but thankfully it's a sigh of relief that no COVID cess has been introduced and the tax rates have been kept as last year. So the slide here, we'll be sharing the slides with you, and you can refer to the rates. The major highlights, as you already know, that in last year the government has reduced the corporate tax rate to 22%, and for new manufacturing company it's 17% the effective tax rates, and the base corporate tax rate is 15%. So it's I think the most attractive tax rates in the Asia Pacific region. Go to the next slide. So as far as the changes are concerned, now earlier there was a confusion that there was a decision of a Supreme Court in the case of Smith Security, which provided that if you have a business reorganization by way of an amalgamation or acquisition of a business, and there was some goodwill created out of that business reorganization, the Supreme Court held that on that particular goodwill, the depreciation was available to the taxpayer. This goodwill was nothing but an excess amount paid over and above the total net assets of a company. And the taxpayer used to claim that we had paid this for a brand name or for some underlying assets in the form of the records of their customer and their know-how, etc. Now, government is of the view that similar to land, a goodwill is some kind of assets which cannot be depreciated, because when you purchase a goodwill from market or a name or a brand name, that cannot be depreciated. If you run a business for a long time, it will obviously increase and not decrease. So that's why government has brought in a change wherein they have provided that there would be no depreciation on goodwill allowed, and it would be treated as good as the land. So from 1st April 2021, if you have a business reorganization and you create a goodwill on any business, no depreciation would be allowed. Now the question comes, what will happen to the goodwill which you have already recognized in the past year? Government has said that they will come out with the guidelines to provide what WDV or the written down value you would recognize in your books of account. Also, they will come out with the criteria for short-term capital gain, if any, because now this goodwill will be removed from the tax depreciation chart. So there will be some short-term capital gain. It may happen if you do not have any other intangible assets, and the government would shortly come out with the rules of how to recognize and how to pay tax on that. Also, since now goodwill will not be a depreciable asset, question comes, what would be the cost of acquisition? Now, Income Tax Act already provides that if it is a self-generated asset, the amount of acquisition cost would be nil. But assuming that it's a purchase goodwill, then the government has said that the depreciation which you have already claimed, that would be reduced from the cost of acquisition, and the balance amount would be treated as cost of acquisition for calculating the future capital gain tax purposes. Another similar attempt to change a ruling provided by the Delhi High Court and thereby the Supreme Court of India was related to confusion on the employee's contribution to a fund, which could be a provident fund or a ESI. Now, there was always a confusion in the mind of taxpayer that if it is an employee contribution and there was a delay to the date which was provided in that particular law, the PF law or ESI law, what will happen to that? Now, there was an argument made by the taxpayer that this employee contribution, even if it was made before filing the tax return, would be allowed under separate section 43B of the Act. Now, the government has clarified that this employee contribution, if you are making after the due date prescribed under the respective law, the PF law or ESI law, you cannot claim it as a deduction. So this will become a permanent loss to a company. So it's important that you going forward deposit the employee contribution before in the fund on time. Otherwise, it will become a permanent loss. Now the question here comes, what will happen to the delayed contribution made for the past year? The government in many occasions have recognized that they will not come out with the retrospective amendment. So we may expect that the past year, until and unless it's pending before any appellate authority, they will not touch this and they'll not reopen the case for the past year just for delay in making the contribution. We can go to the next slide, please. This is in this slide we have provided the amendment which was made by the government just to plug the tax planning avenues of some taxpayer which they have planned in the past, and they have got the favorable rulings from the tax tribunal or the High Court. Now the one is regarding the slump sale. Earlier, a few of the courts have said that if you enter into a slump exchange transaction, because there was no consideration, it would not constitute or classified as a slump sale, because for any sale to have, it should have a consideration. But if it is an exchange of assets, it would not tantamount to slump sale under the Act, and therefore any receipt out of that slump exchange would be treated as a capital receipt, and there being no specific provision to tax that particular amount, it would not be taxed under the Income Tax Act. So government has removed or plugged this loophole and then provided that all the kind of exchange, relinquishment or extinguishment would be covered under the definition of slump sale and taxed accordingly. Similarly, in case of a dissolution of a partnership firm, it was provided that the capital gain would be taxed in the hands of partnership firm, provided it's a dissolution, and they had provided some aspect of how to compute the capital gain. There was no clarity of what will happen on the reconstitution of firm. So the government has now clarified that even though it's dissolution or reconstitution or otherwise, it will be taxed as capital gain. Also, few taxpayers revalued the asset just to take the advantage of this section and reduce the amount of capital gain. So the government has clarified now that in case there is any revaluation of assets done and the partner takes the assets away in the time of dissolution or reconstitution of a firm, then in that case, that portion of revaluation amount will be ignored for computing the capital gain. You can go to the next slide, please. Government has extended some outer due dates for some of the tax incentive provided under the Act. First is the affordable housing. A particular builder used to get 100% deduction on profit and gains from the eligible housing project, provided it had the approval from the competent authority before 31st March. Now, government has extended the due date, and it has also specified that if a builder takes an approval for the development of rental housing project, this will again be available. Similar amendment has been done for the startup. So the startup which takes the approval before 31st March 2022 will also be eligible for the tax incentive provided under respective section. Next slide, please. These are some other key corporate tax proposal which have been introduced in the budget. First is the advance tax installment on the dividend income. Now, when we receive dividend income, we are not sure at what point of time we can get this dividend income. So there is no clarity in the minds of taxpayer. It's on the dividend distribution company who can decide when to distribute dividend. So suppose in the month of April, May, June, I have to pay my advance tax in June, and I don't know whether I'll get dividend or not, and I did not pay anything. And in July, I get a dividend from a company of some amount. Now in September, there was an anomaly that the interest would be charged even though the amount has been received in, say, August. Now government has clarified that if dividend is received in August, the liability to pay advance on that particular amount would lie on the next due date or before 31st March if all the due dates have expired. Similarly, the next proposal is also clarifying in nature, and this was a case which was introduced in the last year budget, wherein they provided that in case of fake invoice created for taking the GST credit, the government has power to attach the property if he thinks that the taxpayer will evade the tax eventually. Now, there was no similar provision provided for the penalty cases. If in case penalty is levied and the tax officer thinks that they will escape the tax of it, so the government has now clarified that it will also apply on the penalty cases. Next provision is also clarificatory in nature, which provides that LLP will not be eligible for presumptive tax on professional services. The reason for this is because under the respective LLP Act, there is a specific requirement for LLP to maintain its book of account. Now here the question is, they have still included the HUF in this provision. Now it's not sure how an HUF will carry out a provision. So this is something which is just theoretical in nature, and government may change or may not change. It does not impact any case. Next provision is there's a change in the definition of zero coupon bond. Now government has clarified to boost the infrastructure investment in India. They have included the infrastructure debt fund in the zero coupon bond. So thereby it means that the capital gain, beneficial capital gain regime which was applicable on the other zero coupon bond will also be applicable for the infrastructure debt fund which is introduced. Again, there was another proposal related to the TDS on payment of dividend. It provided that certain business trusts like REIT or Invite, these are tax transparent entity, but there was no specific provision to exempt the income of dividend which was received from withholding. Now government has clarified that since these are the tax transparent entity, there would not be any requirement to withhold taxes on the dividend received by such entities. Next slide, please. So this was the tax proposal from corporate tax side. Now we move on to the international tax and non-resident taxation in India. And first and foremost, most important tax proposal is the clarification brought by the government on equalization levy. So equalization levy is something which was brought in line with the BEPS project or the OECD project, which was introduced by G20 and OECD long back ago. And last year, the government has introduced, widened the scope of equalization levy to include 2% equalization levy on e-commerce operator on their online sale or online supply to the Indian customer. So this was a shift from source rule to the market rule taxation. Government wanted to have this taxing right on the non-resident for their e-commerce supply or online services. Now there was a lacuna in the law which provided that if equalization levy is applicable from 1st April 2020, the government has provided that the the same income will be exempt under the Income Tax Act, but the date for exemption was applicable from 1st April 2021. So there was a confusion that there will be a double taxation on particular income under equalization levy as well as the Income Tax Act for 1 year. The government has clarified that the exemption under the Income Tax Act will be applicable from 1st April 2020 itself and not from 1st April 2021. Also, there was a confusion regarding the royalty and FTS, which was already being charged to tax under the Income Tax Act. The question was whether all these income which are already subject to tax under the Income Tax Act will again be taxed under equalization levy, or how this will work. So government has clarified that if you are paying any income on which royalty or FTS under the Income Tax Act is applicable, the tax is applicable on that. So in that case, equalization levy would not be applicable on such cases. Government has lastly clarified the meaning of online sale of goods and online provision of services to provide that it shall include one or more of the following activity, which provides that acceptance of offer for sale is done online, or placing of purchase order is done online, acceptance, payment or supply is done online, partly or wholly. Now, again, it's not very clear whether what would constitute an e-commerce operator. Also, in this year budget memorandum, they have nowhere provided this. They have not linked it with the BEPS or OECD program. And last year also, because this was a wildcard entry made directly to the Act and was not a part of finance bill, it's not very clear what is the intention, what is the coverage, and there's some more clarity required on the definition of e-commerce operator and what would be included in the equalization levy on or not. Just taking a hypothetical example, it's not very clear whether physical sale of goods which is supplied to the Indian customer, assuming it's a related party in India, and you have this SAP on which the acceptance or raising of purchase order is done and it's automatically accepted under a SAP. So if we see the definition and take out the literal meaning of it, one could say that because it is done online, the acceptance purchase is done online, it gets covered under the online sale of goods, and therefore it gets covered under the equalization levy. But if we see the BEPS project or the OECD Action Point 1, it clarifies that all these measures are brought to provide the taxation on the digital economy and not the physical sale of goods. So it's not very clear as in what would be the coverage of equalization levy, and there's some representation being planned to be made to clarify all this provision. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is another interesting development made by the Indian government to provide and the tax certainty in India. There was a concept of authority for advance ruling, wherein a taxpayer can approach them and get the advance ruling for their proposed transaction to get the clarity on the taxability of their transaction which they propose to do in India. Now, what we have seen is that there was a shortcoming that the chairman or the vice chairman should be the retired judge of High Court or Supreme Court. And there was therefore difficulty to fill in those positions, and the working of advance ruling authority was hampered, because of which they were not able to deliver the cases, pronounce the ruling on time, and it used to take 4 to 5 years to pronounce a particular ruling, which again disrupt the purpose of advance ruling mechanism in itself. So government has replaced this authority for advance ruling by board for advance ruling. What they'll do is they will appoint 2 members which are not below the rank of chief commissioner. All the pending application would be heard by this new board, and ruling though would not be binding on taxpayer or tax department, and taxpayer or tax department can appeal the case before the High Court. So I think this is a welcome move, and if you are planning any new transaction in India and you're not clear about the taxability of this particular transaction, you can approach the board for advance ruling and get the ruling. Even though the negative ruling comes, then you can have power to approach to the High Court, so you get the clarity better than the other normal appeal mechanism which you have. Also, there are a few other tax proposal introduced as regards international taxation. One is the clarity on the definition of liable to tax. Now, it provides that there is a liability of tax on such person under any law for the time being in force in any country. Even if there is a specific exemption provided, this would constitute liable to tax. So assuming a case wherein there is a income earned in suppose in Germany, and for the time being the German government has said that that particular income is exempt from tax. Now, if a particular person is a resident in India and earning income from Germany, that income is exempt from tax, but the rate of tax otherwise is say 10% or 20%, they may avail tax credit in India now. Because it would qualify as liable to tax. Again, taking a similar example, there was a change in the definition of resident. Now, which provided for liable to tax. So assuming that there's a person who is in Dubai and there is no tax regime at all in that particular region. So in that case, he would not be said as a liable to tax in Dubai, and therefore the residency rule, the new residency rule will still apply because he's not liable to tax in Dubai. So they have clarified this liable to tax definition, which was creating a lot of confusion. Similarly, in the case of FII, to attract the foreign investment, they have provided that tax treaty benefit will be applicable. Now, for withholding the taxes, the withholding tax provision earlier provided that if you are making payment to FII, you have to withhold 20% tax on that on their income. This was creating hardship because if you see the tax treaty, most of the tax treaty may provide the rate lower than 20%, say 10%. So what used to happen was that withholding was done at 20%. However, the final ultimate tax liability came at 10%. So they used to take refund in the tax return. So to avoid that particular aspect, they have clarified that now the FII can also take benefit of the tax treaty. Next slide, please. Yeah, so government has also clarified few aspects on the calculation of book profit, though this may not be applicable on many taxpayers, because if they have opted for the new tax regime of 22% or 15% respectively, then the MAT is not applicable. But for those who still have some MAT credit and are availing the old regime, this may be relevant for them. If you have opted for a APA or a secondary adjustment, what used to happen was that for the past year return, any adjustment used to be recognized in the current year. So for MAT purposes, they have a strict provision, and it used to provide that on any income which has been recognized in the current year would be accounted for computing MAT. This used to create some hardship for taxpayer, and representation were made. So government has now clarified that in case of APA or secondary adjustment which relates to the past year adjustment, now the taxpayer can file an application to the tax authority, and then tax authority should consider this particular income in that respective year to which the adjustment actually belong. Similarly, if you're computing tax under MAT specifically for a foreign company and you're also receiving dividend income, the dividend income under the tax treaty may be taxed at the rate of 10%. So the aspect or the representation were made before the government to provide that this dividend income should be excluded for computing the MAT liability, because dividend is taxed at the rate of 10% under the normal rate. However, under the MAT, it used to be taxed at the rate of 15%, which is the hardship to the taxpayer. So government has now clarified that dividend income will be excluded from the calculation of the book profit for calculating the MAT tax. Next slide. The government has extended the due date of filing the tax return in certain case. One is the case wherein a partner in a firm of the firm which is liable for transfer pricing audit, they have clarified that that partner can now file the tax return by 30th November because the books used to get ready by then. Also, they have reduced the time limit for filing the belated and revised tax return, which was earlier 12 months from the end of financial year, relevant financial year. Now they have said that the belated return or the revised return can be filed within 9 months from the end of relevant financial year. So if you're talking about financial year 2021, the normal tax return dates can be say July, September, or November, but for belated or revised tax return, it has to be 31st December 2021. Next slide, please. So here we have just provided the due dates which are applicable to different SSC. As I mentioned, that the belated tax return or the revised tax return for all SSC has been now restricted to 31st December 2021, which was earlier 31st March. Next slide. Similar to the tax return filing date, government has also reduced the time limit for completion of assessment from earlier 12 months, which is applicable for AY 19, 20, and 2021, to 9 months from AY 21, 22, and subsequent year. Also, the time has been reduced to process the tax return by 3 months and to issue the tax scrutiny notice by 3 months. So if you see the chronology, to file the belated tax return, they have reduced the time limit by 3 months. Similar changes has been done for completion of assessment and for processing of return and issuance of tax notice, each by 3 months. Next slide. Okay, so in this slide, we have simply provided the timelines for completion of the assessment proceeding by the tax officer. So this is the case wherein the matter has not been referred to the transfer pricing officer. I just wanted to specifically highlight one confusion which may be changed later by the government. It's assessment year 2019-20. If you see the last date of issuance of notice as on date because of the CBDT notification, it's 31st March 2021. And the time limit for completion of assessment proceeding as per law is also 31st March 2021. So this is something which government may come up with future and extend the timeline for completion of the assessment proceeding, because it cannot happen that the notice as well as the completion is done on the same date. So we can move to the next slide. Yeah, so this is the case wherein the assessment proceeding has to be completed wherein there has been a transfer pricing reference. So if you add 12 months for all the respective date, you get the date of time limit for completion of assessment proceeding for the transfer pricing matter. Next slide. Now, this is another interesting overhauling done by the government and related to reopening of past cases. Now, the government has reduced the time limit of reopening the cases from earlier 6 years to 3 years, which is a welcome move, because now the government cannot reopen the cases beyond 3 years from the relevant assessment year. However, there is a catch that if your total income which is escaped from tax is more than INR 5 million or more, then the time limit has been increased from 6 years to 10 years. Also, in case of search and seizure, the similar provision may apply. Now, there is also one important change, that they have removed the discretion of the tax officer, which provides that earlier used to happen that you need to have this reason to believe to open the cases, and there was a lot of litigation on that. To reduce that litigation, government has now provided that in case there is a flagging done by the risk management team of the government, or there is a objection by the CAG, or there is a search case, then in these cases, it's eligible for reopening the case. In all other cases, government cannot reopen the past cases. And the process has also been defined, which provides that the tax officer should first conduct the inquiry for all these cases, therefore decide if that particular case is fit for reopening, and then pass the order to reopen the reassessment case. Next slide, please. To resolve the cases which is pending and to reduce the tax litigation, government has come out with a very interesting case of concept of dispute resolution committee. Now, this is as of now not applicable for all the taxpayer, but for only the small and medium size taxpayer. It provides that a taxpayer, if it is not satisfied with the assessment order, can approach this committee for negotiation and discuss this tax order. the limit as of now, which has been provided, is that if your return income is less than INR 5 million, which may cover losses case also, and the variation proposed by the tax authority is less than INR 1 million. In these cases, you can approach dispute resolution committee and try to settle the case with this particular committee. Now, important point to note here is that this committee has power to reduce or waive the penalty and grant immunity from prosecution. But there is, as of now, no specific provision provided to reduce the tax liability or to reduce the interest. So it's not very clear whether they can do the variation on the income adjustment or forego the tax which is to be paid, or whether they can only reduce the penalty and prosecution cases only. So this is unclear, and we'll have to wait to see how this committee works in future. Next slide. Again, this is a welcome move by the government. It's with respect to the tax audit case for business. Now, for profession, the tax audit limit has been provided under the Act as INR 5 million, and for normal business, it's INR 10 million. But last year, government has introduced that if your cash payment or cash receipt is less than 5% of your total cash payment or total receipt, respectively, then in that case, your threshold would increase from INR 10 million to INR 50 million. They have further increased this threshold for the specific 5% SSC from INR 50 million to INR 100 million. So if you have turnover till INR 100 million and you have less than cash receipt or cash payment of 5% of the total cash receipt or cash payment, then you're not liable for tax audit in that particular area. Other than that, there are certain other rationalization changes on litigation front. One is that the assessment appeal was already made faceless by the government. Now they have also provided that the tax tribunal would go faceless from future year, and they'll come out with the specific rules for that. There was a concept of income tax settlement wherein it was once in a lifetime opportunity for a taxpayer. They can go approach a settlement commission and get the tax case settled. Now this has been done away with in line of the dispute resolution committee which has been brought in for the small taxpayer. They have clarified two small points. One is that the income tax settlement order would not be eligible for this direct tax dispute settlement scheme, which is Vivad Se Vishwas. Also, they have clarified that under section 142(1), if you have not filed the tax return, earlier the only power was with the assessing the jurisdictional tax officer to call for certain information to check if you filed the return or what is the status of your affair for that particular year. Now, because of this faceless scheme, any authority can pick up the case. So they have just said, clarified that any prescribed authority defined by the tax department or CBDT can call for this particular information required for 142 purposes. Next slide, please. This is again an interesting change brought in under the TDS or TCS provision. Earlier, last year, the government has introduced the concept of tax collected at source, wherein your sale turnover was more than INR 100 million. You used to collect the tax at source if a particular if a sale to a particular person is more than INR 5 million. There was a lot of confusion and complexity around this. To reduce that complexity, government has introduced the TDS on purchase of goods. So now the liability shifted to the buyer. Buyer will withhold TDS on credit or payment, whichever is earlier, and the other rules are similar to the TCS provision. The only specific point here is that if the TDS has been deducted by a buyer, then TCS will not be applicable. So in a way, I feel that this provision has become even more complicated, because now while doing the TCS computation, one has to check whether the person has withhold TDS or not and then carry out. Earlier, what we used to do is we used to collect the receipt data from the bank and then used to straight away apply the TCS on those particular receipt. Now this becomes more complicated. You have to cut off the amount on which TDS has already been done, and this TDS may be done at the time of credit or payment, whichever is earlier. However, TCS would continue to apply on the receipt. So the reconciliation would again become very, very complex. Next slide, please. Similar to the last provision, now the government, to improve the tax filing, widen the tax base, has introduced a concept of higher TDS or TCS rate in case of a non-filer. So the rate for both has been specified. The important point to note here is that in case the person, if you are making payment to any particular party and that party has not filed the tax return for like past 2 years, then a higher rate would apply for TDS. Similar provisions are for TCS. Now the question is, how will a particular taxpayer know that a party has filed their tax return or not? Probably the government is thinking to come out with some software or something, but obviously it would need some database to confirm and check if the particular party payee has filed their tax return or not. Thankfully, this provision is not applicable on foreign company who does not have a permanent establishment in India. Here, the confusion still remains. Taking a case wherein a foreign company establishes a permanent establishment in India in a particular year, say year 21-22. However, they have not filed the tax return for past 2 years for receiving certain income. In year 21-22, they would qualify as specified person. So what rate would we apply? Whether we would apply the normal rate applicable to the permanent establishment, or we apply the higher tax rate because the tax return would have not been filed by the foreign company. So this is again a gray area which government should clarify. Next slide, please. On the individual taxation front, there are very small changes. One is related to the leave travel allowance. Because of the COVID situation, government had came out with a circular in October, providing that in case a person is not going on leave for travel, so they can take cash allowance in lieu of LTC. And therefore, they provided certain specific guidelines on which this cash allowance can be exempt from tax if they take it from their employer. The guidelines are that that particular expenditure should be incurred for purchase of goods or services on which GST of 12% or more is applicable. The expenditure is incurred in between 12th October 2020 till 31st March 2021. So there is a limited time window. The expenditure should, the total exemption will be lower of INR 36,000 per family member or 1/3 of the expenditure incurred. And payment should also be made through banking channels only. And this amendment is applicable only for 21-22. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next. Next slide, please. Yeah. So there are few other individual taxation related changes. One is that in case an employee is contributing its contribution to the provident fund over and above INR 250,000 in a particular year after 1st April 2021, the interest which accrued on that particular amount over and above 250,000 would be taxable. Earlier, if entire amount used to be tax-free. Now, if it is more than 250,000, the interest accrued on that particular excess portion would be taxable. Similarly, for the case of ULIP, at the time of withdrawal or maturity, all the entire receipt was exempt from tax if the premium for that particular amount in a year was less than 10%. Now they have provided that this would be subject to capital gain tax if it is more than 250,000. Also, they have clarified that in case it qualifies for the equity-based fund, it would be subject to LTCG at the rate of 10% as against the normal tax rate. Next slide. This is again very small and would not impact many of us. This is a relaxation provided to senior citizens who are earning interest in pension income. The only condition is that the pension income and the interest should be coming from one bank account only, and the banker should withhold tax at source for the entire income of that particular senior citizen. In that case only, the senior citizen are relaxed from filing the tax return. The next provision is important, and there was a lot of litigation around this, that what will happen if a particular person who was a non-resident in past and was working in any other country, wherein the retirement fund used to be taxed on receipt basis, and becomes a resident in future in India, and got the amount in retirement fund and was taxed in India on accrual basis. There was a case of double taxation. So government has clarified that to avoid that mismatch and double taxation, they will come out with the rules and provide some clarity on this area. The details are yet to be specified by the government. Next slide. This is again a very simple amendment related to the Affordable Housing Society. Whenever we used to take a loan for Affordable Housing Society, used to get INR 150,000 additional interest as a deduction, provided that the loan has been granted by the particular financial institution before 2021. So they have just extended the outer date that the loan can be sanctioned by 31st March 2022. So this is again a welcome move on which the tax incentive had been extended by the Government of India. So I think this was it from corporate tax and international tax side, and I'll be happy to take any question. I would now like to hand over to Jemli and Anand for taking it forward.
Thank you, Gaurav, for the explanations on the direct tax proposals. I'll immediately go on to the next slide, and now I'll take you through some important changes on the indirect tax front. And basically, I keep on saying this, that after introduction of GST, the budget has sort of become a non-event from an indirect tax perspective. And the number of changes are progressively getting reduced, pretty much like the duration of the finance minister's speech, which is actually good. But every year they pick up some important agenda item, and we try to make ourselves relevant. And this year seems to be the overhauling of the exemptions under the customs law. However, before we go in that direction, let's look at some important changes on the GST front. Next slide, please. So first important change would be, a retrospective amendment in the definition of supply. So there was a Supreme Court ruling in the case of Calcutta Club, where it was held that services and goods supplied by a club to its members would not be liable to service tax because it's a service to self. Now the government has made a retrospective amendment to say that these two entities, which is the club and the members, would be treated as separate undertakings, and any transaction between the two would be considered to be a taxable transaction. Okay, so moving on to the second change, a very important change now that the government has decided to discontinue with the provisions relating to GST audit. So there would be no GST audits going on from future, and this came as a rude shock to some of the professionals who were, who had a lot of fee from GST. But to be very frank, this was an important change because there was a negative feedback about GST audit process as such, the forms, the same being an expensive exercise for small and medium-sized undertakings. So it's a good change which has happened. The next change is on input tax credit. Earlier there was a dispute whether the deviation of invoices which are uploaded by the vendors and not appearing in GSTR 2A and 2B of the customer, whether there is a legislative backing to it. And then the government had introduced a rule 36(4), which provided that an assessee would be able to only take credit up to 105% of the total invoices which are appearing in GSTR 2A, and whether there is a legislative backing to this rule. Now the government has made a change, and now it is very clear that the credit under section 16.2 would be allowed only when the supplier uploads the invoices in his form GSTR1, and the same are getting communicated to the recipient of the invoice in form GSTR 2A 2B. And therefore now the section itself has a very clear guideline that you can take credit only up to the invoices which are appearing in GSTR 2A or 2B, plus the 5% additional which the government allows under 36(4). And the last important change would be that, there is now the government has given a power to initiate recovery proceedings, directly recovery proceedings, if the liability as declared in form GSTR1 and GSTR 3B does not match. Earlier, there was no power to the assessing officers to initiate the recovery proceedings directly. So now this change has been brought. Next slide. Okay. In the next slide, this is a very important change which everyone needs to understand, that section 16 of the IGST Act, which prescribes what is zero rated supply, has been amended to provide that supplies made to SEZ units only for authorized operations would now qualify as a zero rated supply. So you would remember that pre-GST era, under the CST Act, you had a Form H, and under the service tax era, you had a Form A1, A2, which was required for the suppliers to undertake so as to ensure that they are not charging taxes on supplies to SEZ. So the same era has now been brought under GST law, but the proceeding on how exactly would it be construed that the goods or services are being used by the SEZ for authorized operations, this system has not been brought in. So all suppliers to SEZ units would have to now consider declarations or indemnities from the SEZ customers that they would use the goods and services for their authorized operations, and only then you do not charge GST on your invoices. Secondly, they have now changed the refund related provisions. Earlier you had two options. One was to charge GST and pay GST on exports and then claim a refund of the GST paid, and second was to claim a refund of unutilized input tax credit. So the first option now is done away with. You only have an option of claiming refund of unutilized input tax credit after the end of the tax period. Further, they have also now brought the legislative provision that for exporter of goods, they need to ensure that they are recovering the money within the time frame prescribed by FEMA, which is 9 months normally, and due to COVID it has been extended up to 15 months. So you have to recover the money for your exports within this time frame, and only then you would be allowed to claim a refund. Next slide. Yeah, so this is some consequential changes are there in the provisions relating to detention, seizure, and release of goods which are in transit. So when the flying squads catch hold of trucks when they are in transit, there was a lot of litigation going on, a lot of judgments came up. So they have made sweeping changes in the entire procedures, including mandatory penalties of 25%, treating the matters as separate as compared to tax recoveries, compulsory penalties on account of 200-300% to be paid, and separate notices to be issued. So major changes have been brought in here. Next slide. In this here now we move on to the customs law, and some important changes we will quickly like to discuss. So customs tariff is now being proposed to be changed. There are more than 350 changes which have been brought to the customs tariff. Now this is in line with HSN 2022, which has been introduced by WTO, which is the 7th edition of the HSN, which is used for a uniform classification of goods which are internationally traded. And these amendments are basically to carry out changes in the goods. There are new goods which are introduced, for example automated robots, which was not there in the HSN classification. So all these changes in terms of new products or change in the existing products, these to bring them into account, these changes have been carried out. For you as a company, you have to obviously go back and check whether there's any change in the HSN classification of the goods that you are importing. Second change is on the exemption side. Government has made a major announcement saying that they are currently reviewing around 400 customs exemptions and would come out on 1st of October with a new customs duty structure. This is a thing to be watched out for. And also they have brought in a sunset clause. So every customs exemption which is conditional in nature would now be only valid for a period of 2 years. That means if they are introduced in this financial year, they will come to an end by 31st of March, which comes after 2 years. So you will not have customs exemptions which are just going on for an endless number of time. Next slide. Yeah, some important changes on the procedure side. Now, bill of entries have to be mandatorily filed in advance. Earlier, you could file it one day after the arrival of the vessel. Now, you have to file it one day in advance only. And also, there is an announcement of a customs common portal, pretty much in line with the GSTN. We all hope that it is not like GSTN, but much better. Customs already has a portal called as IceGate, and now they want to just bring it in line and to facilitate the registrations and to file bill of entries, shipping bills, carry out amendments, they would now notify one of the portals as a common portal. Next. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. One important change I would like to highlight that now there is a time limit for completion of proceedings which are initiated by the customs authorities. So any DRI or a customs department which starts the proceedings by issuing a summon or a notice, then they have to completely, close the proceedings and issue the show cause notice within a period of 2 years. Next slide. Next slide. So now we come to the ADC, introduction of agricultural cess, which is a new change which has been brought in. Next slide, please. Yeah. So a new agricultural infrastructure cess has been brought in. Alongside which will be applicable along basic customs duty and not over and above.
Anand, your voice is cracking. We are not able to understand.
So this is
Hello, Sunil here. I think Anand's videos got locked or we cannot hear him properly. So since that was his last slide, let us move on to the transfer pricing proposals. So I'm sure everybody knows that there are absolutely no amendments this year. So you might be wondering exactly what are we doing and discussing about transfer pricing proposals. So yes, there are no amendments this year, but what we have to keep in mind is, as all the speakers have said, and we all know that the government has had to spend a lot of money this year on health, and has lot of tax also, as the GST collections for first 5-6 months during the lockdown. So absolutely there was no revenue, but certainly excess expenditure which the government had to give plenty subsidies. There were 2-3 announcements done during the lockdown, big announcements. So certainly we have to keep in mind that although the GST rates have not increased, the income tax rates have not increased, so where is all this money going to come from? Yes, we have shown the finance bill also reflected heavy deficit, but certainly the government is going to run only if there's revenue. So there is always a backdoor entry which is based on your disputes or litigations that can happen. So I have only 3 slides which I've proposed under transfer pricing. This is the first slide, which are the BEPS initiatives which are already introduced in the Indian income tax law in the earlier budgets, which is master file, CPCR, thin capitalization, secondary adjustment, and all these are only means of giving more information to the tax officers. Mind well, it is not only for the tax officers in India, but all over the globe. There was a request for from the tax administration that they need to know more about the group. So, who's really doing the development work, who's doing the R&D, which is the entity, holding the IPs for the R&D. So you're paying royalty to the person or an entity which is not the developer. So what should be the remuneration? Who really should be paid the royalty? So all these questions, can be answered only if a macro view is available to all tax administration. So these BEPS initiatives certainly rolled out in 2017 in India through the budgets are giving more information to tax officers now, and certainly I am sure they will always use it to see whether the activities or the transfer pricing arrangements in India by the Indian subsidiaries or companies is being done at a correct in the right way. Next slide, please. So what we thought is we'll discuss some typical arrangements which are under greater scrutiny. So, if you see OECD came out with a transfer pricing guidance on financial transactions in February 2020, just when the lockdown was in place in some countries, and in March it started in India. So not much has really been discussed on this OECD TP guideline for financial transactions. We need to note that India is not an OECD country, so these guidelines directly do not apply. But since we don't have our specific guidelines for financial transactions, you have, or the courts also have referred to in many rulings on the OECD guidelines. So these guidelines will certainly, take importance now in the coming months and years. The financial transactions is the first part which we want to look at, which has been commented upon in the TP guidelines also. So what is going to be, now what will be questioned first is whether a loan received by an Indian subsidiary, whether it is really a loan. So what is the debt equity which is, in the industry? What is the debt equity in your company? So suppose you have only 1 lakh rupees as the share capital, but you have, 100 crores as the ECB loan. So certainly there's a parity in debt equity, and you have a lot of payments by way of interest to the parent company, to the shareholder by way of interest. Now, the first thing even this OECD guidance talks about is, first check whether a loan is a loan. Now in the transfer pricing audit report, whenever we receive any loan from a parent company or an associated enterprise, we have to disclose all transactions. One of the transactions is, receipt of loan. And exactly for this receipt of loan, you have to, give the arm's length price which you have to compute. Now this arm's length price computation, you can fall back to this OECD TP guideline, which, questions whether the loan should have been really a loan or it should have come part as equity. Now the BEPS had discussed, various ways how you can, tackle this position of loans. And India opted for thin capitalization, which was, discussed on the earlier slide. So thin capitalization was to limit the interest to be paid by an Indian company. So India opted for this regime. So in my view, whether this loan is a loan, whether this can be really be challenged by the government or the Indian tax authorities now, it's a little difficult. I think they will have to only invoke GAR to have some recourse or to take an adverse opinion that this loan should not be, treated as a loan. The second part is, if you recall in 2009, government liberalized the royalty rates. So under FEMA, we had royalty rates of 5% on, domestic sales royalty and 8% on exports. So this was a cap maximum amount which was payable, which an Indian entity could pay as royalty. Now these caps were done away with from 2009. Similar, range is given for ECB loan interest. Like if the maturity period is more than 3 years, it is LIBOR plus 4.5%. Now, if you go to see, FEMA guidelines after 2009, the tax authorities till 2009 did accept, the royalty rates as per the FEMA guideline. But suddenly after 2009, they said, oh, that is only for FEMA purpose, and that is not really the arm's length price determination. So you leave aside that range for FEMA. So similar thing can happen for this interest on ECB loans or interest which are paid for foreign borrowings, you know, that okay, that is a limit given by FEMA, which is the maximum permissible interest rate that can be paid. But what is your benchmarking analysis, whether you've done a benchmarking analysis, and then only that should be allowed as your interest. So we see a lot of litigation in the last 12 months on interest on ECB loans, guarantee fees, so fees not charged by the parent company, or you know, you have outstanding receivables, overdues from your parent company or associated enterprises, and you've not charged interest on that. So this is a new favorite which I call, which we will see in the coming years also. Intra-group services, these are management fees, you know, favorite of the income tax department. So they will ask for whether you really received intra-group services, whether economic benefits are there, even if you have been allocated IT cost, you know, whether really you received some Microsoft license, you know, where is the proof for that and where is the evidence. So a lot of documentation also needs to be maintained. Now this Economic Times snippet which I've put, this is a news which came in November 19, you know, where it was said that, you know, government is, you know, reconsidering the introduction of those royalty payment restrictions, you know, where you had that 5%, 8%, which was done away with. Suddenly this can come back again. So this was, of course, you know, it was an idea from the Department for Promotion of Industry. And fortunately, I think the Finance Ministry, you know, raised objections because this will send negative signals to, you know, investors abroad. So I hope that this does not see the light of the day, and we hope that the royalty payments won't be restricted anymore. Next slide, please. So the last slide which I wanted to discuss is on Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, not what they said, but certainly when you look at the background, what is expected is, you know, you create India as a manufacturing hub. Now for manufacturing, what we see is you will be characterized as a contract manufacturer. So you can set up an entity either for manufacturing in India and exporting to the group worldwide. And the second one is you manufacture in India, you export to group, as well as you have domestic sales. Now the challenges here are for the second part, when you have domestic sales. When you have only manufacturing and export, you know, what you are doing is a routine activity of manufacturing. So you are not doing the R&D, you are not doing the marketing, and therefore the profit share which an entity earns from overall transaction of, you know, developing the R&D, manufacturing, marketing, and then selling. So from all these activities, if you see what Indian company is expected to is only manufacture and sell. So all the return in relation to the development of royalty and for the selling and marketing needs to be, you know, allocated to your associated enterprise. So what you should expect is a routine return for manufacturing activity. So this is fairly simple, but when you know, affect domestic sales in India from a manufacturing activity or a manufacturing hub here, is you complicate the situation a little further, because you then sell to the final customer, you earn the selling price, you get the whole, you know, selling price which is you know, paid by the market, and then now out of that you have to allocate the share of profit for intangibles, for R&D to your parent company. Now if we see the earlier slide where, you know, if we hope that it does not come, but if the royalty payments are restricted, then this can be a challenge that, you know, what is the royalty payment that would be allowed, because under this manufacturing and domestic sales scenario, what you would expect is roughly a royalty rate of 20-25% payback to the associated enterprise. But however, if it is restricted by the government order, it may really, you know, be only 5 to 8%, and suddenly you will have huge profits in the Indian entity. So these points also need to be kept in mind when you create a manufacturing base in India. Certainly some benchmarking analysis need to be done, what is to be considered in the cost base. So these are important points which, you know, you should keep in mind. So I think considering the time, I end my session with these 3 slides. Rajesh has also arrived.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Sunil, and thanks also to Gaurav and Anand for their presentation, and also to Mr. Auster for his address. Friends, we'll take a few questions quickly. Actually, we are running short of time, but maybe we can take a couple of quick questions. I would request the speakers to please switch on the camera so that we can quickly take a couple of questions. Anand, maybe let me start with you first. Anand, as the GST audit provisions have been discontinued, will we have to get the GST audit done for financial year 1920, Anand?
Yeah, so so this law which has been changed, this would be applicable, after a day to be notified, because right now the state law is that it's right now just a bill, and after getting the presidential accent, from a date to be notified, it will be made effective. So right now, as on current date for the financial year 1920, GST audit has to be conducted. This was recently clarified in a tweet finance ministry also, but high likely from 2021 onwards, this will not be required.
Sunil, a question has come. You have spoken about Atmanirbhar Bharat and the advantages. So, question has come is, are there any benefits for setting up manufacturing unit in India?
I think transfer pricing, will not give much benefits. I think Gaurav, you can take this question. Yeah, this will be more under the income tax normal provisions.
Yeah, I'll take that. So basically, if you set up a new manufacturing entity in India, the corporate tax rate which would be applicable to you would be 15% plus the compulsory surcharge and cess. So the effective tax rate in your case would be 17% as compared to 25% in the normal case scenario. So you get a tax saving of 7% in your total income, which is a most attractive tax rates across the Asia Pacific as of now.
Gaurav, I'll come with one more question for you. With the introduction of TDS on purchase of goods, were the provisions regarding TCS on sales of goods introduced last year become redundant?
I would say to an extent, like 90-95% of the cases would get covered, but there could be a scenario wherein the purchaser has a turnover less than INR 100 million. So in that case, the responsibility then shifts back to the seller, and seller is required to withhold, collect taxes on that particular revenue. First, it would be very challenging and complex for the seller to compute on what amount TDS has already been deducted, therefore he should not collect TCS. And second, if the TDS has not been deducted or the buyer is not eligible to deduct TDS, then TCS would still be applicable. So it's not totally redundant, but it becomes more complex in terms of practicality of it.
Thank you. Martina, I think there's a question, perhaps you can answer that well, Martin. Views on how the current budget will affect investments in India.
We are one of the great promoters of investment into India, so this is close to our heart. All the companies here in this group and in the VDMA are close to what we experience every day. We see generally an unchanged positive trend and increased attention. The budget itself twists and tweaks tax compliances. There are some ups and downs for the compliance landscape. So proper guidance is always still required, but the message is clear. We have this super low tax income tax rate for new projects. So the message is very clear. For manufacturing, it's a most attractive destination, even more than before. And what we see from our practice also is clear that the interest is continuing to be very strong. And of course, we also feel this is a good strategy for companies. So we see a positive upside here. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Those are positive statements, Martin. Thank you. The last question, I leave it who would answer this within the team. With such high fiscal deficits, how will this impact India's rating? So who would like to take it up? Either
I can take it, Rajesh. See, this year is sort of unique, and yeah, so this year, from my perspective, is quite unique, and therefore, I think it was absolutely prudent on behalf of the finance minister to sort of overstep and cross the fiscal deficit target. And I think this is a global phenomenon. And if they would not do it in such a year, which is this year, I think this would have been actually taken negatively. So the main idea was to spur growth, spend more money on infrastructure and healthcare, which the government has done and which was basically expected from the government. So I really don't see this to really impact India as such from a rating perspective, because this would be a global phenomenon.
Also, Mr. Nath, just one point to add here is that if you see the IMF report, it provides for 11.5% real GDP growth for next year. So I think that's a good sign. Along with this, if you see the GST collection number and the unemployment rate after the lockdown was removed, so it is now back to normal, which at this stage, which was before the lockdown. So I think we are almost there to a situation which was before the lockdown, and we are continuing to grow at a steady pace. So that way, IMF is also recognizing that fact. So that may not impact the rating, or in fact improve the rating in future.
Right. Perhaps one last question from my side is, there are a lot of positives in the budget, but I think we've also seen increase in import duties on certain components, parts. This reinforces some belief that there is some measure of protection for the local industry. How would you take that up? I leave it who answers that. Anand, would you like to start with that, or yeah? Actually, Anand, we can't hear you. Maybe just switch off your camera and just see if it is working. Yeah, Anand. Yeah.
Okay. Am I audible now? Yeah. Okay. So
yes,
basically,
yes.
currently customs duty is not seen only as a revenue. Yeah, and it is now sort of a geopolitical tool. Apart from collecting duties, it is seen as a tool to prevent, discourage demerit goods, etc. And hear the finance minister's speech. He also said that the customs duty rates are sort of have a twin objective of promoting domestic manufacturing as well as helping India to get into the global value chain, in a much better fashion to export more. So while if you see wherever the customs duty rates have been increased, these have been increased per se from an objective to promote local manufacturing and to nudge the Indian manufacturers to localize sourcing from within India. Most of the rates are increased on finished products, while the BCD rates are reduced on raw material. You can see that wherever government felt that the duty to be reduced, for example, on steel products, on gold, they have reduced the duty rates, and immediately the prices of these commodities came down. So I think government is quite, on line with where the duty rates have to be tweaked. While it has some negative impact on, for example, the electronics industry as such, but I think government is quite mindful of the products where they are increasing these duties.
Anyone else? Sunil or Gaurav or Martin, would you like to comment on that or add something?
I think the Make in India message is very strong. It continues to be strong. It's a consistent policy which we find in all types of places, and that's also in that sense a requirement that companies have to commit differently to the Indian market than it may have been the case like 10, 15 years ago. So that all falls into this perspective and may need adjusting for some companies, adjusting their strategies, and may change their cost structure compared to their existing business model. So they need to follow that political lead. As Anand has said, it's also a strategic nudging that's happening. So companies need to be aware of that and follow that.
Yeah. Thank you, Martin. And with that, I think I hand over to you, Martin, for the concluding words.
Thank you. A lot has been said in the details. So I think coming back to the beginning, we are part of a recovery which is more a hockey stick and thankfully not a cricket bat shape. And we were hoping this, but we were not sure when we looked at all of this almost a year ago, how the things developed. So it takes a lot of energy, and it did take still a lot of energy for everyone to move to that level. We've seen the tax collections moving up. We've seen the business. We've seen things returning to some type of new normal in some fields. There is still a road ahead. It will still require the full resources of Indian creativity and German structuring and continuity to continue on a path which we see the ingredients being very positive also with this budget. So in that sense, we are looking forward to an exciting 2021 for all the companies. So, and it's been a great pleasure. It's been a great pleasure for us again to be associated here in this group, which of course, as you know, is very close to our hearts and to our business all year round. And to see the companies of VDMA succeed in these interesting times. Thank you all.
Great, thank you, Martin, and thank you, Anand, Sunil, and Gaurav. And also, I would like to thank Mr. Oster. I think he's logged out, but I would like to thank him for his address also. And I would like to thank all our viewers and participants, all the VDMA member companies who joined this interaction today. Friends, I think we're going to see interesting time. 2021 is going to be an interesting, exciting year for the Indian economy, for the Indian industry. And I hope the budget also sets the impetus and sets the ball rolling. And at the end of the year, I think we are looking to see a growth story emerging out. And let's hope this growth story is a strong and sustainable growth story. So friends, stay well, stay safe, everyone. Martin, stay safe in Germany also. I think this scenario in Germany with the COVID is much more severe than what we are facing here. And thank you to all the colleagues from Rodel and Partner for the excellent presentation. Thank you. Goodbye. Have a nice evening and a nice weekend. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.